The city lights shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, casting a cool blue glow across the penthouse. Everything inside was polished, too polished. Marble, chrome, and silence. Julian sat stiffly in the high-backed leather chair, opposite his father's desk, legs dangling, not yet long enough to reach the ground. Welcome to Heartfelt Stories, where every tale touches the soul. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And whatever you do, don't skip a second. Because the ending? It might just break your heart, or heal it. So sit back, relax, and watch till the very end. Damien Wexler stood behind the desk, sharp suit, sharper eyes, and a voice honed by power. "You're 12 now," Damien said, pressing his fingertips together. "It's time we talk about your future." Julian's throat tightened. The boy had learned early that talks with his father weren't really talks. They were briefings, scripts. Damien opened a slim black folder and slid it across the desk. Inside were glossy photographs. 3 women, all stunning in curated ways. One with an icy stare and a pearl choker, one with a knowing smile and blood-red lipstick, one posed beside a yacht in Santorini. "These are the finalists," Damien said, tapping the folder. "All highly respected, educated, socially elevated. You will pick one." Julian's brow furrowed. "Pick one? For what?" "To be your mother." The words dropped like glass on concrete. "I don't—" Damien raised a hand. "You do. Your decision will reflect our legacy, our image. You're a Wexler, Julian. This isn't about affection, it's about alignment." Julian stared down at the photos. The women looked perfect, too perfect. Faces that didn't smile with their eyes. He didn't know them. He didn't want to. He shifted in his seat. The air felt too cold now, the kind of cold that wasn't from temperature. "Do I have to choose now?" Julian asked quietly. "You've had 12 years of watching the world, haven't you?" Damien's voice was flat. "You've seen what fits and what doesn't. Choose wisely." From the corner of his eye, Julian noticed movement. The door to the office hadn't quite closed. Camilla stood just outside, holding a silver tray with a single untouched espresso. She wasn't looking in, not directly, but her presence hovered. Soft, like steam from a kettle. Her uniform was crisp but faded at the sleeves, her hair tied neatly, and unlike the women in the photos, her hands were working hands. Julian looked at her, not a glance. He looked. Camilla glanced up at that moment, startled to meet his gaze. She started to turn away but froze. Something passed between them. Not romance, not fantasy, just recognition. Damien followed his son's gaze and turned sharply. "The maid?" His voice sliced the air. "Don't be ridiculous." Julian didn't flinch. "She's kind," he whispered. "This isn't about kindness," Damien snapped. "It's about legacy." Julian looked back down at the folder. He pushed it away gently. "I want to choose her," he said. "Not them." For the first time in years, Damien Wexler went silent. In that moment, the temperature in the room dropped again. But it wasn't the air. It was the beginning of war. Julian didn't move. He felt the weight of his choice like a stone in his chest. But something else stirred too. Something like a pulse or defiance. Outside, Camilla stepped away from the door. Her heart was racing. She had just become part of something she never asked for, and someone was already watching. The door slammed shut so hard the espresso cup trembled on its saucer. Damien Wexler stood behind his desk like a man who had just been spat on by fate itself. His eyes bore into Julian, who didn't flinch. "Not this time. You've embarrassed yourself." "And me," Damien hissed. "You think this is a joke?" Julian didn't answer. He kept his gaze steady. A boy wearing armor made of silence. "She cleans toilets," She irons your clothes. And you want to parade her like she's royalty? Damien spat. You have no idea what you've just done. Outside the office, Camilla clutched the tray to her chest, motionless. She wasn't supposed to hear. But every word was a knife. Inside, Damien was pacing now. The board has been briefed on our expansion with the Westlake family. Their daughter is expecting a proposal by year's end. We had the press at the gala. Do you know what it means when a Wexler chooses a maid over a legacy? Julian's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Maybe it means the legacy is broken. Damien froze. You don't get to redefine what this family stands for, he growled. Maybe I don't want to stand for it, Julian replied. There it was, the line that cracked the air in two. Damien didn't hit him. That wasn't his style. His punishment came in pressure, in silence, in things removed rather than given. He walked to the wall and pressed a button. Camilla to the foyer, he said into the intercom, his voice ice. Camilla entered a minute later, unsure whether to make eye contact. Damien's smile was thin. Congratulations, you've won the attention of my son. Camilla's eyes widened. Sir, I didn't— Oh, I know, he interrupted. You didn't mean to. You just smiled too often, got too close. You accidentally became more important than you should have been. I'll leave if you want, she said softly, voice shaking. This job, You'll stay, Damien cut in. We can't have the media asking why the boy's beloved maid suddenly vanished. But understand this. He leaned in, his voice turning deadly soft. You are not one of us. You never will be. Julian stepped in front of her, small but unshakable. Then maybe I don't want to be one of you either. Damien's expression darkened, but he said nothing. He simply turned and left the room. Camilla stood frozen, her breath shallow. Why did you do that? She whispered once they were alone. Julian looked up at her. Because you're the only person in this house who's ever looked at me like I mattered. Her throat tightened, but she didn't speak. The storm had started, and the house they stood in, polished, rich, and empty, was about to become a cage. The clinking of cutlery was too precise, too rehearsed, like an orchestra of knives. Camilla sat stiffly at the far end of the gleaming white table, her posture careful, back straight, trying to shrink without appearing small. The brunch was supposed to be informal, just close friends of the Wexlers, but the chandelier above her said otherwise. It dripped crystal-like judgment. To her right, Julian picked at his food. He hadn't let go of her hand since they'd sat down. To her left, silence. Across the table, 6 elegantly dressed women laughed in low, controlled voices. One of them leaned toward another and whispered something behind a manicured hand. Laughter followed. It wasn't joyful. It was the kind that sliced. Camilla's knuckles whitened around her linen napkin. Isn't she lovely? One of the women said aloud. So real. Like a character from a novel. Another chimed in. One where the prince goes mad. More laughter. Shrill. Tight. At the head of the table sat Damien, expression unreadable. His wine glass remained untouched, his fork idle. He was watching, not eating. And beside him, Victoria. She wore muted tones and pearls, the kind of elegance that whispered power instead of shouting it. She hadn't said much, not yet. She didn't need to. Her presence did the speaking. Measured glances, slow sips, a smile that was always just 1 degree away from pity. At one point, she caught Camilla's gaze and tilted her head slightly. You should try the soufflé, she said. Chef said it's delicate, like ambition. Camilla blinked. I'm fine, thank you. Victoria smiled, but her eyes didn't. No need to be afraid. You've already won, haven't you? Julian suddenly stood, We're leaving. Julian, Damien said sharply, but the boy didn't flinch. He turned to Camilla, extended his hand. She hesitated, then rose. As they walked out together, the air behind them shimmered with amusement and disbelief. Victoria's voice floated. After them, calm and crisp. They won't last long. He's still a child. And she turned to Damien, her voice softening to silk. Well, she doesn't know how this world works. Damien didn't respond. His eyes were still on the door they had just exited through. Outside on the mansion terrace, Camilla finally exhaled. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean to cause this. Julian looked up at her, then to the garden beyond. They think I picked you to ruin something, he murmured. But I picked you to survive something. Camilla turned away, blinking back tears. Somewhere, inside, Victoria's laughter echoed faintly. Not loud, but constant. Camilla had been invited to the table, but she was never meant to have a seat. The agreement arrived in a white envelope, placed neatly on her bed without a word. Camilla stood frozen at the doorway, the silence of the mansion pressing in on all sides. The paper was thick, expensive, like everything else here. On the first page, behavioral guidelines and residency terms. She read it slowly. Each line felt colder than the one before. You will reside in the East Wing. You will attend family functions when requested. You will not initiate physical contact with Julian. You will avoid appearances of impropriety. You will be recorded at all times. There was a clause at the end. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination and legal action. No signature line. No room for negotiation. She pressed the paper against her chest and closed her eyes. The East Wing felt like a museum no one wanted to visit. White marble floors, frosted glass doors, sterile lighting. Her new room had no warmth, just perfect symmetry. A single camera blinked red from the corner ceiling. She saw it immediately. She turned away. She didn't wave. Breakfast was now brought to her room. She wasn't allowed in the kitchen anymore. Julian still found ways to sneak in. Once, he slipped her a note under the door. Just a drawing of a house, a real house, with a garden, a window, and two stick figures holding hands. She didn't cry. She wanted to. But that too felt like something they'd see. At night, she'd sit by the window watching the flickering lights of the city. And that's when the memories came. She was 13 again, sitting in a borrowed dress. Hair brushed straight, lips dry with fear. A man, older, well-dressed, smelling of leather and bourbon, smiling at her like she was a prize. You're special, he had said. You're the quiet type. That's good. That's what we need in a home like this. Back then, she'd been chosen too. Adopted. Promised a future. Promised care. But it had never been love. It had been ownership. By the time she realized it, the door to that house had already locked behind her. Camilla wrapped her arms around herself now, breathing shallow. This place, this mansion, wasn't so different. Same silence, same cold, same rules dressed up as generosity. One night, Damien appeared at her door without knocking. I trust the accommodations are acceptable, he said, stepping in without waiting for an answer. Camilla stood. Why am I really here? He examined a painting on the wall. Public relations? Optics? My son's little rebellion needs sculpting. And after that? He turned to face her. After that, he'll understand reality. And you'll be compensated for your trouble, quietly. Her voice trembled. He's not a pawn. Damien raised an eyebrow. Neither are you, unless you want to be. He left before she could reply, his footsteps echoing down the marble hall. That night, she covered the camera with a hand towel and sat on the floor in the corner. She hugged her knees. She was no longer the maid. But she wasn't free either. Somewhere in this house, the boy who trusted her was dreaming. and somewhere else in this house, the man who owned everything was watching. The door to Julian's room had been left ajar, unusual in a house where every door was always closed, always controlled. Camilla stood outside, hesitant. She shouldn't be here. The rules were clear. No unsupervised access. No boundaries crossed. But something tugged at her, a worry she couldn't explain. She stepped inside. The room was colder than she expected, not in temperature but in feeling. It was too clean for a child's space. No clutter, no drawings, no mess. Just a bed, a desk, and a small shelf of untouched books arranged by height. Only one thing looked truly lived in: a worn, navy blue notebook, left half-tucked beneath the pillow. She reached for it and paused. Then, with a breath, she pulled it free. October. Third father says feelings are for the weak, but I still remember how her voice felt in the morning. October 10th. Sometimes I dream she's still here. My real mom, not the ones in the pictures. October 11th. He fired her, said she was too soft. I heard them yelling that night. She cried. I never saw her again after that week. Camilla's fingers trembled as she turned the pages. November 2nd. Victoria smells like old perfume. She talks to me like I'm a stock option. November 8th. Camilla brings warm towels and looks me in the eye. That's rare here. No one looks me in the eye. Her chest tightened. December 1st. Sometimes I think the house eats people. It eats their laughter, their voices. It ate my mother. It's trying to eat Camilla. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. The journal rested in her lap like something sacred or dangerous. Every word was a thread unraveling a boy who had grown up surrounded by mirrors but never truly seen. The journal wasn't just a diary. It was a confession and a warning. She placed the notebook exactly where she'd found it, tucking it back beneath the pillow with care. As she stood to leave, her eyes drifted to a framed photograph on Julian's desk, one she hadn't noticed before. A young woman with soft eyes, holding an infant in her arms. The woman's smile was tired, but real, alive. The silver frame was dusty. No one had touched it in years. Back in her room, Camilla stared at the ceiling, heart racing. What happened to Julian's mother? And more terrifying, what else had this house buried in silence? She reached for the light switch, then stopped. Instead, she left the lamp on. She didn't want to dream tonight. The private dining room on the 31st floor was reserved for conversations that weren't meant to echo. Candles flickered low. Wine glasses sat untouched. A single waiter stood near the wall, silent as the shadows. Damian Wexler leaned back in, his chair, arms crossed, eyes narrow. Across from him, Victoria twirled her wine by the stem, but didn't drink. She wore a silk blouse the color of old money, and her lips curled with a familiarity earned through years of proximity to power. You still have time to undo this, she said softly. Before the cameras notice, before the shareholders whisper. Damian didn't respond. Victoria slid a folder across the table, her fingers grazing the edge like it was poison she'd built immunity to. Her name isn't what she says it is. Not entirely, she murmured. Camila Duarte? Born Camila Reyes, foster care, a sealed juvenile record, and a very specific disappearance in 2009. Damian's jaw twitched. This is from a private investigator? From my investigator, she corrected. The one I use when I feel someone threatening our future. He opened the folder, eyes scanning the pages. She's a liability, Victoria continued. She'll burn this house down from the inside, and worse, she'll do it quietly. With that innocent face. Damian closed the folder, fingers drumming the table. I knew she was hiding something. She's not one of us. Victoria said, her voice silk over steel. She doesn't know the rules. She never will. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. But I do. Camilla's door creaked as she pushed. It opened that night. She froze. Her dresser drawers were overturned, her shoes scattered. Her closet door stood wide, coat hangers twisted and empty, and on the pillow, a single photograph. She picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a picture she hadn't seen in years, a grainy print from an old cell phone. She was younger, 15 maybe, sitting beside a girl with wild hair and bruised arms. Behind them, a faded group home sign blurred in the background. Her heart plummeted. She remembered that day. She remembered the screaming that followed, the accusations, the escape. She remembered not being believed. She turned sharply and checked the security camera in the corner. The little red light was off. For once, the house wasn't watching, which meant someone else had been. Later that night, she stood barefoot in the marble hallway outside her room. The silence was different now. Tighter. Weighted. She knew what this was. Not a warning, but a message. She wasn't being watched. She was being hunted. Across the estate in her own wing, Victoria sat at her vanity, calmly removing her earrings. The corners of her mouth curled into a quiet smile as she unpinned her hair. She didn't need to scream or threaten. She just had to whisper in the right ear. And Camilla was already slipping. In her room, Camilla stuffed the photo deep into the bottom of a drawer and locked it shut. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, hair tousled, eyes tired, mouth set firm. They wanted her gone. But she'd been disappeared once before. She wouldn't vanish again. Julian awoke to silence. Not the usual kind, not the polished, weightless quiet of the Wexler estate, but a silence that felt wrong, too still, too hollow. He sat up in bed, heart thudding. No knock on the door. No soft footsteps in the hallway. No warm towel waiting on the bathroom counter like every morning since Camilla had moved into the East Wing. He waited. 10 minutes. 20. Then he opened the door. The hallway was empty. Her door was closed. He ran. The room was stripped bare, drawers left open, bed sheets pulled halfway off, the window cracked just enough to let in the wind. Julian stood in the doorway, breath caught in his throat. Gone. Her notebooks, her shoes, even the folded photograph she kept hidden in her drawer, all gone, except the camera, still mounted in the corner, blinking steadily. Recording. What? He turned and ran. Damien was already seated in the solarium, sipping black coffee like it was any other morning. The city skyline glittered behind him. A newspaper lay folded on the table beside his phone. She's gone, Julian said out of breath. Damien didn't look up. Yes. You let her leave? I didn't let her do anything, Damien replied calmly. She left. Julian stared at him. That doesn't make sense. She wouldn't just leave, not without saying goodbye. Damien's eyes flicked upward, measured and cold. People leave, Julian, especially when they don't belong. That night, Julian couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the blank page of his journal. The silence was louder now. It rang in his ears like a warning. Something felt fractured, like the house had swallowed her whole. It was nearly midnight when he heard the voice, faint, muffled, drifting down the corridor. Damien's study. Door was slightly ajar. Light leaked through. Julian crept closer, heart pounding. She's being handled, Damien was saying into the phone. No press, no attention. She won't be a problem. A pause. Then, if she talks, we bury it. Just like the last one. The last one? Julian's blood turned to ice. He backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. Back in his room, he curled up on the floor beneath the window, journal clutched to his chest. She's being handled. Handled wasn't the word you used for. Someone who left. It was the word you used for a problem. A mess, a secret, a threat. He squeezed his eyes shut, but sleep didn't come. Only questions. Where had she gone? Why had no one looked? And what exactly had this house done to the last woman who cared about him? The next morning, staff avoided his eyes. The cameras kept blinking. The breakfast tray came from a stranger. Camilla's name wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. She had become one more locked door in a house full of ghosts. The estate's back gate hadn't been opened in years, but that night, Julian pried it loose with trembling hands and slipped out into the fog. He moved fast, hoodie pulled low over his head, sneakers silent on the sidewalk. No cameras out here. No eyes in the walls, just the sound of the city breathing around him. He had memorized the address from an old delivery log, a name scribbled in the margins beside a date. Manuel Ortega, former transport. He found the building near the edge of downtown. A rusted walk-up with sagging steps and lights that flickered as if unsure whether to stay on. He knocked once. Then again, the door creaked open, revealing a tired man in his 60s, face like weathered leather, eyes sharp beneath drooping lids. "Julian?" Manuel blinked. "Dios mío, you look just like your mother." Julian swallowed hard. "Can I come in?" The apartment was warm but cluttered. Old photographs, dusty trophies, and a cracked photo frame of a much younger Manuel beside a black town car, the Wexler crest faint on the door. Manuel poured tea but didn't ask why Julian had come. "Tell me about Camilla," Julian said quietly. Manuel's hands paused mid-pour. A silence stretched. Then, "You saw her too, didn't you? That look in her eyes, like a deer, always listening for the next step behind her." Julian nodded. "She wasn't just a maid," Manuel said. "That girl, she ran from something. Something powerful. A man, I think, or a system, or both. She changed her name. Wexler gave her papers, but not safety." "Did my father know?" Manuel exhaled, lips tightening. "Damien knows everything. He's the type who buys silence, not trust. When he took her in, I thought maybe he was giving her a chance." He looked away. "But people like your father don't give chances. They give cages that look like homes." Julian's fists clenched in his lap. "Why would she run again?" "She didn't," Manuel said, meeting his eyes. "People like Camilla don't vanish twice by choice." Julian left just before dawn. The streets were still asleep. He stood by the curb and stared up at the mansion on the hill. Glass, steel, silence. Camilla had been hiding long before she entered that house, and now she was hiding again, or being hidden. The difference, he realized, was everything. The rain fell hard that evening, not gentle, not cleansing. It pounded the glass walls of the solarium like fists demanding to be let in. Julian sat alone on the bench beneath the curved ceiling, knees pulled to his chest, hoodie soaked from earlier. He hadn't spoken since returning from Manuel's. No appetite, no journal, just stillness. Victoria found him like that. She stood behind him for a long moment before speaking. "You shouldn't be out here in the cold," she said gently. Julian didn't turn. "Why do you care?" "I didn't before," she admitted. But something changed. He looked over his shoulder. Her usual polished expression was gone, replaced by something raw, uncertain. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I should have told you earlier." Julian shifted slightly. "She called me," Victoria said, her voice low. "Camilla." Julian sat up. "What?" "It was 2 nights ago. Around midnight. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. I thought it was a mistake. I didn't want to get involved." Julian's eyes widened. "What did she say?" Victoria hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "I saved it, She stopped, Her screen froze mid-scroll. Wait! The voicemail was gone. Deleted. She blinked. I didn't delete it. I swear. What did it say? Julian demanded, voice rising for the first time in days. Victoria swallowed. She said, Tell Julian I didn't leave him. Tell him I tried. Then the call cut off. Julian stood, breath caught in his throat. When? 2 nights ago, she whispered. She sounded scared. His knees buckled. He collapsed back onto the bench like the words had physically struck him. She didn't leave, he murmured, staring down at his trembling hands. She tried. That night, he sat in his room, staring at his phone. Call logs, messages, nothing. He went to the security console. Access denied. He asked the housekeeper if Camilla had left any belongings. All cleared, she said, eyes down. He tried to reach Manuel again. No answer. The walls of the mansion were spotless, soundproof, and suffocating. He was alone. In truth, now. Not even her voice remained. In a dim hallway behind a locked panel of screens, a man watched silent footage of the solarium. Victoria's lips moved, Julian's face crumpled, but the audio feed was muted. The man hit delete. The file vanished without a sound. Back in his room, Julian sat with the last page of his journal. He didn't write anything. He just stared. Then, slowly, he closed the cover. It no longer felt like a diary. It felt like evidence. The envelope was waiting for him at breakfast. No note. No explanation. Just thick, cream-colored cardstock with his name etched in silver on the front. Julian. He didn't open it. Not yet. He ate in silence while the estate bustled with false. Calm, glasses polished, footsteps muffled, voices low. Camilla's absence had been folded into the routine like a forgotten stain-ironed flat. Julian finally unfolded the flap and looked inside. 3 new photos. 3 new women, all beautiful, all smiling with practiced ease. One was a philanthropist, one a senator's daughter, one a tech heiress. All curated, all approved. On the back of each was a single handwritten word in his father's script. Acceptable, Damien. Was already waiting in the drawing room when Julian arrived. Sunlight streamed in from the tall windows, but the room felt dim. Sit, Damien said, not looking up from the fireplace. Julian remained standing. You've had your tantrum, Damien began. It's time to resume the path that was always meant for you. He turned and gestured toward a side table where another folder lay. You'll choose one of them. We'll release a quiet statement, shift the narrative, a rebranding. Julian's jaw clenched. You want to rewrite the past? I want to salvage the future, Damien replied coolly. For both of us. Julian stepped forward slowly. He didn't look at the photos. Not this time. You said I could choose. And you did. Poorly. Damien's voice sharpened. You mistook sentiment for strategy. Camilla was a distraction. Julian's voice was steady now, older, hardened. No. She was the only real thing in this house. Damien raised a brow. What you call real almost destroyed us. No, Julian said. You did. A beat of silence. Then Damien took a slow breath and walked toward his son. You don't understand what this name means, what it costs to carry. Julian didn't move. I do now. That's why I'm not playing your game. Damien stared at him, something flickering in his eyes. Not quite rage, not quite fear. Do you think this ends with you walking away? Julian held his gaze. I think it ends with me not becoming you. Outside the room, the staff paused, hearing raised voices through the door, muffled but unmistakable. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably. The maid with the breakfast tray froze mid-step. No one had heard Julian speak like that before, not even once. Damien stepped back, brushing dust from his sleeve like it mattered. "You'll change your mind." Julian walked to the door. "I already did," he said softly, the moment she disappeared. He didn't slam the door behind him. He didn't need to. That night, the folder still sat on the table, untouched. The photos faced upward, eyes that smiled without meaning it, and, in a drawer beneath the folder, a thin silver chain, Camilla's necklace, left there like an afterthought or a mistake. The hallway behind the East Wing pantry was narrow, lit only by a flickering emergency light. Julian hadn't been here in years. The air smelled like old wood and secrets. He moved with purpose now, not the hesitation of a boy, but the quiet determination of someone who had been lied to too long. He had remembered something Victoria once muttered during an argument with Damien. "You always keep the mess in the West Corridor." So Julian followed the corridor to its very end. At the final door, he tried the knob. Locked, but then, beneath the frame, a small smudge of fingerprints. Camilla's? His own? He pulled out the flathead screwdriver he'd pocketed from the garage earlier and forced the latch. With a crack and a breath of stale air, the door creaked open. Inside was darkness. Heavy, insulated darkness. Julian found the light switch. A dull fluorescent buzz filled the air. The room was windowless, lined with metal filing cabinets and rows of hard drives. In the center, a desk, a monitor, a stack of tapes, and sitting, alone on the surface, her necklace. The small silver pendant with the chipped edge. The one she always wore. His hands shook as he picked it up. Still warm. No, his hands were just cold. He turned on the monitor. The screen blinked to life. Black and white video feeds, bedrooms, bathrooms, hallways, the staff quarters, Camilla's old room, rewind.play. There she was, sitting by the window, arms wrapped around her knees. She looked tired, thinner than he remembered. The footage was time-stamped. A day before she vanished, another clip. Men entering her room, no uniforms, just gloves. She didn't scream. She stood calmly, as if she'd known it would happen. They escorted her out the side door, one no one used. Julian's stomach twisted. He clicked into the files labeled private legal documents, medical reports, psychiatric evaluations, all dated after her disappearance. One stood out, Camilla Reyes, voluntary admission, Clear Horizons mental health facility. Julian blinked. Voluntary? He inserted the final tape into the machine. The screen flickered, a hallway camera, pale light, a nurse walking down the corridor, clipboard in hand, and then a glimpse through a narrow window in a door. Camilla, in a hospital gown, hair undone. Eyes distant. She sat on a thin mattress, staring at the wall. The audio crackled. Nurse, off camera. "She hasn't spoken in days," male voice. "Doesn't matter, as long as she stays quiet." Click. The screen went black. Julian sat frozen. She wasn't missing. She had been silenced. Disappeared not by fate, but by a signature, a contract, a father. He looked down at the necklace again, curled in his palm like a question. Was she still there? Still watching the same wall? Still waiting for someone to believe her? Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Julian turned off the light, closed the door behind him, and slipped the necklace into his pocket. He walked back into the house that had just shown him its truest face. Not a home, not even a prison, a machine. And he was done being its part. The video went live at 3:14 a.m. No watermark, no voiceover, no name attached, just cold footage, silent men entering a room, a woman escorted out with no resistance, and a final haunting clip, Camilla, in a hospital gown, staring at a wall that had stolen her name. By morning, it had 3 million views. By noon, 20 million. The headlines came fast. CEO implicated in involuntary detainment scandal. Who is Camilla Reyes? The woman silenced by power. Wexler empire under. Federal Review, and beneath them all, grainy stills of her face. Not glamorized, not filtered, just human. Julian stayed quiet. He didn't claim it, didn't need to. The world spoke for him. Damian Wexler resigned 1 week later. The press conference was brief, his expression unreadable. He called it an unfortunate misstep in internal oversight. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the end of an era built on silence. Victoria vanished without a statement. Rumors swirled, a retreat in Switzerland, a private island, or something darker. But no one could confirm. She had always been good at exiting. Without a trace, Camilla was released within days of the footage surfacing. No charges, no press interview, no comment. She simply walked out the front doors of the facility, wearing a borrowed coat and carrying a folder of discharge papers. The sky was overcast, but she tilted her head to feel the wind anyway. Months passed. The estate was put up for sale. Julian declined to inherit it. Instead, he disappeared from the public eye. No interviews, no appearances. Only a quiet shift in ownership filings. Several properties transferred to non-profit entities. One of them, a red brick townhouse on a quiet street near the edge of the city. Its door opened every morning at 8 a.m. Inside, warm lights, hand-painted, signs and laughter. Camila named it La Casa Libre, the free house. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. A shelter for women who had been silenced, erased, or simply never chosen for the right reasons. Julian didn't visit until the second month. He waited outside until everyone had gone in. Then he stepped through the back gate and found her in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, planting tomatoes. She looked up, startled, then smiled. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said quietly. "I wasn't either," he admitted. He held out the silver necklace. She took it with both hands gently. "I kept it," he said, "all this time." She nodded. There was no need to say what it meant. They sat together on the bench beneath the fig tree. No cameras, no contracts, just wind in the leaves. Julian watched her for a long moment, then whispered, "You were always my mother." Camilla looked down at her calloused hands, soil under her fingernails. "I didn't raise you," she said softly. "No," Julian replied. "You saved me." The sun dipped behind the clouds, casting the garden in soft gold. Inside the house, someone was laughing. Outside, the world moved on, not with noise, but with peace.